Today, I am talking to Samantha Slade, and she's in Canada, Montreal, right?
Yes, exactly.
And we're going to talk about working horizontally, organizing your company horizontally. And you've written a great book about it, Going Horizontal. And I was wondering, because you just mentioned in the pre-conversation, you were doing a lot of courses on this topic before you wrote the book or published the book. And how did you actually got into this topic? Because you started in teaching, right?
Yeah, my background is, well, before teaching cultural anthropology and then teaching. I was in education for 16 years.
And what did you make? How did you go from, because teaching in a school is completely different than looking in an organization, how you make that horizontally, right?
Not so much in a certain funny way. Nobody's ever asked me this question, the link between my 16 years in education and my 20 odd years in organizational development. Because as a teacher, well, first of all, I'm in Canada. So I had this unique blessing is that when I became a teacher, I chose to begin my career in a northern community. So in Canada, that means an isolated, you fly in and you can only fly in and fly out, right? And so I worked with children from very young age to older age. So I basically had 5 grades to teach at the same time. Imagine. And it's my first year of teaching. And so the only way to do that was to create a self-organizing classroom and for the students to self-direct and self-manage their own learning. There was no other solution to teaching 5 topics like at the same time at different grades. I had primary school and high school all together. And that was this kind of, it was like a design challenge, if you will, that I rose to and fine-tuned into like a very sweet system in which everyone was thriving, everybody was self-directing, but in a collectively held way. And it was absolutely beautiful for both myself and the students. From there, I moved on and became a pedagogical consultant, then a curriculum development, and then I was on loan of service to the Ministry of Education and Research and Development. So I was really thinking about this thing about not just how we learn, but how we thrive as human beings, right? And at one point I realized that I had a lot of creativity in me. And so maybe the best place for me to express that to its fullest was to be in a private business. And so that's when I left the public education system and started Percolab, which is today a cooperative and a network of cooperatives. And it's going to be 15 years soon. So it's almost as much time, in one and the other. And organizations have done the very similar thing as education system, as they think that you have to set stuff up in a hierarchical way, the same as the teacher to the classroom and everybody tells you what to do. That education model is very akin to the business model that we've taken on. Neither one of them really makes sense. Neither one of them is attuned to our human nature. That's the cultural anthropologist. And it's very simple to break through them and go into very, very natural feeling, very simple, very accessible practices, ways of organizing, functioning within constraints that are both productive and feel good for yourself and each other.
Okay.
Yeah.
Couple of questions.
Yeah.
Because you said, okay, so you started in this first year and you have all these different age groups in your class. And I can imagine that this was not part of your education.
No.
So where did you pick up this way of working that you made your own?
So prior to going into education, I worked in cultural anthropology. My actual university background initially is in cultural anthropology. So the idea of studying the way human beings give themselves as a system for doing things. So I'm acutely aware that we can give ourselves any system that we want to because I study different systems around the world, right? So you take that on one hand, and then you take my personal story. So my personal story is that because I was studying in anthropology, I took a year off of my studies and went to Latin America to, really look at when a country has a revolution and says, we're going to change our system, what does that look and feel like? So I went down to like experience it and see it with my own hands and eyes. And so I've been really always very curious about this, like the ways we give ourselves to organize. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you see that, during that trip, I fell into some kind of trap of organized crime, and I was taken hostage and put on a market to be sold into a human trafficking system. And so it's just in that instant, it really lasted just a few hours, this incident, because of course I survived it. There was a young boy who was maybe 10 or 11 years of age who through a great act of courage helped me escape. And that has always seared into me that idea of leadership is for everyone. It doesn't matter your age. It doesn't even matter if you're an adult. So I have that. My model for leadership is an 11-year-old boy.
Wow.
Right?
That's
so
interesting.
You take my cultural anthropology kind of knowledge, my model of leadership, which completely is a personal, very powerful experience, and then just my life journey. Of course, I'm always going to be thinking about how we organize, what's leadership in there, how power shows up. These are my life questions.
Okay, why did you go there? What did you not why? What did you want to do there? Did you was it like tourism, or did you really want to work there in South America?
I worked in different organizations, so the idea was how could I, from best I could from my early age 20s naivety, blend into a local organization and really get a feel of what does it mean to be in an organization in a country that's living a revolution. During that time period, it was Nicaragua, by the way, and just to experience so I worked in a cooperative, and then I worked for an arts organization, and I really just kind of lived both the good and the bad, the dream and the disappointment, the surprise and the things that weren't any surprise at all. And it really had me thinking a lot, and I've never stopped thinking about these things.
And when you were captured and you got released, was it? Did you
didn't really get released.
You escaped.
The young lad left the door unlocked for me,
yeah,
and let me know so I could escape. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, you escaped. So and when you was that a moment that you thought about going home?
At that time, it's interesting. No, it never occurred to me to go home. I continued. There's something on it. I mean, part of my journey is I have a real curiosity to think about the different ways human beings do things. And so I have a certain joy about being in different places in the world. I'm European by birth. My mother's lineage is from the Spanish Civil War. So there's displacement and refugees in my family. My parents were nomadic for 10 years on a sailboat. So that whole idea of being where you are and being fully there is something that is comfortable for me. So it's funny that you asked that question. Did I ever think of going? No, I continued my journey as I had planned to do it.
Right. And you also, before you mentioned that, you said you felt that I'm going away from the trip, by the way. I'm going to the switch you made from school to business, right? You felt that you
yes.
had more creativity going into business.
Yes.
Why can't you release the creativity in schools?
Oh, I did release it in schools, but I realized I was a system changer. So being in a single school was not feeding into my system change, right? So it felt like for me, if I really look with hindsight now, it was this magnificent prototype space for me, right? I was perfectly happy with the group of students I had for the different years, and had huge amounts of learning, huge amounts of experimentation, huge amounts of tool development. And then I kept moving different places within the education system. And then I realized that to continue my journey of exploring and creativity, it was to, for me anyways, at that point, it was to move out to private sector.
Right. Do you feel that you might ever go back?
Well, I feel like the me who wanted to affect systemic change in the education system back then was under-equipped to do it. And the me that's today with all the learnings, if I wanted to go back into the education system to effect systemic change in there, I could undertake that huge challenge, because it's huge moving that, that steamship, yeah. But for now, I am perfectly happy where I am.
You know, I understand, but you mentioned it's huge, but isn't it also necessary for future generations?
Yes, and so one of the things that that I think that Percolab Co-op, one of the things we're very acutely aware of is there are people in the public sector, in all different spheres of the public sector, who are brilliant and amazing and visionary and caring and brave and want to really effect change. So how can Percolab be supportive of these people? So many of our both our contract work is with public organizations and people from public institutions who come into our different trainings. And there's obviously, I have a soft spot in my heart for supporting these people. Yeah. I just last, maybe a week or two ago, I had a conference with a high-level manager in public health here in Quebec, and they've been working with us for 6 weeks to bring in horizontal culture, collaborative culture into the public health. And I mean, given the current situation, that is a workspace that's absolutely being taxed. I mean, the pressures that are put on the workers in public health right now is phenomenal. And so I'm so in awe and appreciative that they have been able to find space to actually look and understand that working in a more horizontal culture is a way of taking care of mental health, of productivity, of the burnout. And it actually is caring towards the employees. And so they've taken on a change process in the midst of the pandemic for the workers, because they understand the value. And what they're finding as they move forward in it is it really is affecting benefits at places they hadn't necessarily imagined. Yeah.
I see the same things that you're describing here in the Netherlands. I mentioned before that I'm working now with somebody who's writing a book about the new European way of working, and the hospitals here are also kind of like organized in the Anglo-Saxon way. So top down, you have this small part of the job to do. You cannot make any deviations from it, and you have to write down the hours that you work on a patient. So there's more registration than actual work sometimes. And I can see how, and that he is really writing these books and being in these organizations to change that. So I can see how this could really help them to go horizontal. But I can also imagine that this period of time is not easy, right? Like you said, the amount of stress that on healthcare is enormous at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So one of the managers that we're working with, she said something that's really stuck with me. She says, Samantha, I have always been an excellent manager. I've done what needed to be done in efficient, timely ways. The only problem was I was miserable and my teams were miserable. And she says, this way of being a manager, I'm just as efficient in getting the work done, but there's much more, I don't know, it's not just joy, but care and well-being amongst the teams. And this time, one of the things that the pandemic is really shining a light on is that we can't just go to work and show up and just be doing things. We are human beings, and this extra layers of pressure and ambiguity that we're living in is causing us a high level of stress and anxiety. And so we are really calling in for a little bit more attention and care towards each other. And it's not, it's like there's some kind of myth out there that if you're going to do caring ways of working, you lose productivity. And that is binary thinking. That is a huge myth, because what I have seen is when you do horizontal good collaboration well, when you do it well, it is just as, if not more productive, and there's data on that, more productive, but especially you're nourishing human beings. And so that just is so important at any time and has become more evident during the pandemic. And I think that might be one of the reasons why people are actually in the current times opening up to maybe looking more creatively at how to organize and work.
I hope
more
so.
than prior.
Yeah.
I'm hoping it's one of the impacts of it.
Right.
Well, actually, I'm hoping. I am seeing it in lots of places.
Right. Now, I can imagine that you see, because you are in the center of it, but I still see a lot of, in the Netherlands, first, to be clear, I don't see it yet. So, but on the other hand, the time is also right for us that we start this group and creating this course. So maybe I'm not right. What is for you the difference between joy and well-being?
Well, I don't want to make it just about like work has an obligation to make me happy. I think there's some basic ideas of being a more conscious human being is more important than just the joy, which can come without the levels of consciousness. There is a reality that we are working today in a system that was not created to take care of everyone. It takes care of some at the expense of the others, right? That is a fact that we are, all living in that. So when we face that, it's not bringing us joy. It is bringing us awareness and consciousness. And so part of that is to actually really affect deep change in the world that we're in today. At one point, we'll have to be accepting that we'll need to be uncomfortable, right? And so if we're just focusing on joy, I think we forget some of the deep systemic change that we need to do that isn't necessarily fun. And also, deep learning, and this is the educator in me, deep learning is not fun. Like light level, superficial learning, super fun, super joyful, super enjoyable, right? But when you go deep learning, there's a pain to it. There's a vulnerability to it because you're like reconfiguring parts of you. Like there's neural pathways. It's exhausting. It's challenging. It makes you revisit your life. You can actually be harsh on yourself and go, oh my God, I can't believe I did this for all those years as you become aware of something else. So there's like a process to go through of like mourning ways of old as you step into new ways. So being in kindness to yourself, acceptance, these are the things of the words for me that are just as important as joy.
Yeah, that's good. Because I can see what you mean with that deep learning isn't real fun. It's just hard work. It's just, you have to get through the situation to go to the new situation, right?
Yeah, I mean, like learning science is going to talk about human beings love to be in a space of learning, but there's like an elastic to it. If it's too much, then we get overwhelmed and we're no longer thriving. If it's too little, we kind of stagnate. There's like a sweet spot, right? It definitely, when you're moving into like reconnecting with self-organizing, self-managing horizontal practices, you're in a high, deep learning space. Though these practices are natural for us, that's the strange thing about it. So, you can do something as simple as saying, oh, let's bring in an appreciative culture as a way of doing continuous improvement. So appreciative culture means, like, imagine at the end of this, our session today, we'd say, oh, let's just do a AAA on how it went. So what did we appreciate? What went well? What was like there and was present was great, but there wasn't enough of, so that we'd like to amplify in the future. And then what was actually, we kind of like fell off the chair and we should be adjusting, right? So those three things is so simple. It's in our human nature to do like triple A's, like appreciate, amplify something that's working well, and adjust. And so bringing in like a culture, a ritual, a practice of doing that is ever so simple, yet we can experience a little bit of pain as we integrate it, because we go, oh, right, I haven't been appreciative enough. I'm just always going into the adjust to people. So I'm missing some of the, you know, kindness as well. And so, yeah, any new practice that you bring on, no matter how minute it is, it helps you start thinking about your life narrative of how you've been showing up at work, as you think about how you would like to be showing up at work. So yeah, there's an intensity to that, and it's perfectly normal. And then basically, as you practice a bunch of times, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. But it's a little bit like, you know, when you learn to drive a car, and at the beginning you're going in there and you're so overwhelmed because you've got like 80 things to remember simultaneously, and when you're finished, you're completely exhausted. It just gets easier and easier and easier with time, until at one point you're just doing it all. It's like your body's doing it like it's natural. You're not even, there's no exhaustion. It's perfectly natural. Well, that's what some of these practices are about, horizontal practices. It's like doing them enough times that they just become automatic, and we do them. Like if you came to, you know, a team meeting at Percolab in our co-op, you'd just be like, the things that we're doing aren't a big deal. They've just become second nature. So somebody will do something and go, oh, can I have a AAA on that? And somebody will go, oh, sure. Would you like it focusing on that or focusing on that? Oh, focusing on that. And then it just goes. And people will talk like this as if it was normal land, you know?
Yeah, I was wondering what AAA was when you mentioned it the first time. So, but I've written it down.
Yeah.
So, and I was thinking about the book I'm reading now. Also, is from James Altucher, his new book. It's Skipping the Line, or Skip the Line. I forgot what the title was. But he writes about the things that he's doing a lot when he was in a mental bad place. He started writing down 10 ideas every day. So he makes a list of 10 ideas, and sometimes he just writes 10 ideas about a company and sends it to somebody in the company to, here, you have 10 ideas. And the
Beautiful.
way is, yeah, and he says, well, the thing is that it becomes so natural to spit out these ideas that it also feels safe to just give them away, because there's just plenty, because then, you know, there's plenty of them, right? Because you do it every day, it's so normal for you to do it. So when somebody asks, do you have an idea? You have 10 ideas, go. Do the thing with it, and you know, I don't need to know how things going for you. And I think that's similar, because when you read the book, Going Horizontal, there's a lot of things in there when I read it the first time that, oh, how will this work? How do you need to do this? You have to think about all these steps that you mention, and I go, oh my God, this is overwhelming.
Well, that's because you're still in the thinking space. You got to stop thinking. It's like if that guy was thinking about writing the 10 ideas for business every day, and if he keeps it in the thinking space, it gets overwhelming. We've got to take it out of the thinking space and get it back into our hands in the doing space. And then we think about how it went in the way that's like we take on our learning stance. So it doesn't need to be perfect the first time. Like when you look at the way we organize meetings right now, it's been iterated from decades and decades and decades and decades, right? So we just assume it's the way it has to be, right? But it doesn't. Like somebody created the way the meeting happens in your workspace, and it got iterated, fine-tuned, and then accepted as whatever. It can change at any time, right? So if you want to come in and try something out, of course, it's not going to be as crystallized into the perfectly adjusted form the first time, because you're trying out like a different way of doing it that needs to adjust to the specific context of your work world. So, I mean, sometimes I work with groups. We often do a thing called co-manage meetings. So how does everybody take responsibility for a team meeting, for example? And so you co-create the agenda, and each person is like an item owner of the point on the agenda, and then you facilitate it yourself. You self-attribute the amount of time you want from the collective amount of time, and people can even gift time to each other during the process as a way of saying, I see your point as so much priority, I'm going to gift you my time in 10 minutes to finish it. Like, so all of these very natural, caring, functional, productive human practices come into play. I guarantee the first time you would run a co-managed meeting, your colleagues are going to find it clunky because everybody's like, what? How do we do now? What do we do now? Like a little bit like the first time you go and learn to drive a car. And the second time you go, then people are like, oh, I get what you mean, da, 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 da. And when we do this, in co-managed meetings, we invite people to have like a shared vocabulary of the types of points you bring to an agenda, which basically is saying, I'm making explicit what I'm expecting of other people in the meeting. So I suggest 4 default categories, which are like, I'm just, going to inform people, so people just need to be silent and listen, or I'm going to consult, and so I'm going to be silent and listen. Or we're going to co-create and work together. So I'm going to put something in the center, and I don't have the answer, and we're going to work on it together. Or we're going to have a shared decision, which means the other points is not decision making. The points of decision making, I'm going to say this is a shared decision. So I often use with organizations these 4 categories, but they might not be the fit for your organization. So you could go and try them out, and you go, oh yeah, 2 of them really work because our organization is this, da, 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 and we need one other one, and not this one, So you have to, like any new practice or way of doing it, it has to be fine-tuned and iterated to be a response to your local context. So again, we need to try it out multiple times, right? But the real thing that people do, and this is the thing that mind boggles me, is that when you're trying a new practice, you want to try it out in a safe space. So you don't want to go to your huge, high risk, high stakes, like company meeting as the first place you would try out a co-managed meeting, right? It's like trying out your car for the first time and driving across 3 countries. You don't want to do that, right? So what you want to do is you want to work with just a couple of colleagues in a team meeting, just like, or a project meeting, just some small meetings where if you mess up, people are going to, not judge you. There's care. You can talk it out, learn, and tweak it together. And when it's more like a felt habit in you, then you go, okay, I think I'm ready now to take it to that much more high risk place. So doing that in like, I call this, it's like a pathway of practice. Just go like small, easy, kind spaces first. Develop your ease, develop your contextual adjustments, and then as you grow in that confidence and ease and adjusted tools, then take it up to the higher spaces. So often I hear people go, oh, Sam, I really think this, horizontal practices are really great, but I took it to this thing over here and it didn't work. And I'll say, well, had you tried it out 3 or 4 times before you did that? No. So I know straight away that it's almost like you're not giving yourselves the conditions for it working well. And there's something, I applaud the bravado, but I also invite us all to go, what's wrong with small steps? Small steps can really impact some deep, profound change because we're taking the time to do it well and in an attuned way.
Let's say you're a business owner, right? And you're thinking about this.
Yeah.
I work with smaller companies. So let's say there were 25 people, right? And so then you want to introduce it into a small group, or do you want to introduce it in like the management team meeting? What do you suggest?
You introduce it for yourself first. You don't have to take it somewhere. First of all, you go, I want to be comfortable doing co-managed meetings. I want to be comfortable formulating and receiving, appreciative AAA feedback, right? So like, I want to. So before I try and do this for others, why don't I just make sure, where do I need to go? Where are like the natural places for me where I can try this out and develop the ease and refinement and skill. So when I've done that, then take it up to team meeting. If I'm in an organization, there's 25 people, well, of course, trying like bringing in horizontal cultural practices via team meeting is such a low risk place to do it, because there is no real like danger of bringing in a different team meeting practice. And even then at the same time, try it out with smaller project meetings, that process, before you bring it in to the bigger team meeting. So where people are each owners of the items, self-attributing a certain amount of time from the collective time, you're rotating roles of like somebody who's holding the flow, someone who's hosting the time, right? Someone who's holding the documentation. So you rotate that around. It's such a simple thing to deconstruct of like hierarchical meeting cultures where one person chairs and holds and everybody has their roles and they're fixed with time. And then people show up as participants who get disengaged or disgruntled about how it's going. What happens when you flip that and all of a sudden everybody's co-responsible? And when you've had a role, once you've taken the seat of a role, then you're much kinder about how you perceive it when other people are in that seat if you've taken it yourself. So everybody taking those seats really changes it. And meeting culture is one of the underestimated inflection points for bringing in horizontal culture in organizations. I often say, show me your team meeting culture and I can actually tell you your organizational culture. I can read it from that.
I want to ask you, what is the most difficult part of implementing horizontal organization or organizing? But I think it's wise that you first explain what are essential parts of it. So
after living my business person life for many years, and so both as a lab within our organization and working with all these different clients and companies across the world, I like sifted it down into 7 domains of practice that are in the book, and they're really basically common to most worlds. It doesn't matter the size of your business, it doesn't matter the domain of it, and it doesn't matter your role in the business. There are practices in these domains that are accessible for everyone, and you don't have to have like a big like structural change to start affecting these practices. They're just like they're small enough. So the way I've named them out, and there's a real intentionality in the order, right? So you've got, first of all, autonomy and purpose. So really everybody seeing themselves as a leader and knowing how, like, practices to claim your personal leadership and to share the leadership space. Purpose, because in the end, if purpose is the leader, then people can really collaborate well rather than an individual being the leader in work that needs to be done. So really working with purpose, not just the purpose of the business, the purpose of this project, the purpose of this report, the purpose of this meeting, the purpose of this item in the meeting, right? Like all the different levels in a very fractal way. And then after that, of course, we've got meetings. So how do we show up in meetings in a way where we're all co-responsible for them? Because if you can get that in team meetings, then people can actually build up to being co-responsible for a company, right? Being co-responsible for a meeting builds being co-responsible for a team, being co-responsible for an organization, right? So meetings is a really instrumental place. The other two that I kind of pair up are transparency, so being open and sharing. And so really, can you shift the defaulting to open and closing things up because there's a valid reason. So shifting the default to open, right? This is all sorts of practices from around what we're working on, how we're feeling, to budgets, and of course, you know, all the way up to salaries. And then that goes hand in hand with decision making. And you can't open up and share decision making if you're not sharing the information, right? Like they go together. So being really intentional and clear in the different methodologies that exist for decision making and what methodologies are used for what context in your organization. So, I mean, I dream of every organization having its decision making map so that somebody new could come in and know where decisions are made and where they can affect them and what methodologies are being used, with a little decision making log that you could very simply go and inform yourself of the recent decisions. I mean, it's such a simple thing to do for organizations of 25 people, very simple. So those are the next two: transparency and decision making. And then after that, of course, we call it learning and development. Really, how do you have a self-directed learning system in an organization, and how do you hold that collectively? So getting beyond learning just being like somebody doing a needs analysis and telling me which training to do, whereas I can actually be seeing what I want to be learning, what makes sense for where the team and the organization is going, and having all sorts of creative ways of affecting my learning. The AAA process that I just gave, like using that, it's a self-directed learning tool. You get that?
Yeah.
Like it totally shifts it. If I'm a real learning organization, bringing in tools like that as just part of team culture is like building up your learning culture. So self-directed learning, collectively held, and of course the final one, relationships and conflicts, which people think is, you know, a nice to have when you have enough time, but we all know that if it doesn't get the attention it deserves, things escalate and then completely take over and overwhelm a situation and the work and the productivity and the general atmosphere in an organization. And the cost of not taking care of relationships and conflict is absolutely phenomenal in organizations. So like the micro practices that take care of that, we don't talk about it enough. Like just me knowing when I'm present and centered versus when I'm triggered, right? And how do I see that for someone else and help that through? So don't take, if I see my colleague is triggered, rather than escalate the situation, how do I invite in something that will appease the situation?
And triggered means triggered?
Triggered means I'm having an internal reaction that is not commiserate or appropriate to whatever's going on. It's because my life story is showing up in this work context right now. And so I'm having a disproportionate reaction. And if people don't know that, and I'm not self-aware and saying it, then I say some nonsense, somebody else responds to it, and it goes up and up and up and up. So for organizations, acknowledging that we all have our triggers and just having that as part of like a normalized way of understanding human beings in the workspace and working with that is really a way of proactively taking care of the relational space in the organizations. So I think when you go in more horizontal mindset, what you're trying to say is the same way everybody's responsible for a well-run and productive meeting, we're all co-responsible for a healthy and functional and flowing work atmosphere, right?
Yeah.
So if that's true, then everybody needs to see themselves as proactive in that. And so, you know, there's some basic practices like having circle dialogue as a way of leaning into attention and having a very simple tool that can help just address it, work through it, and coming to a feeling of much more calm and appeasement in a very quick and efficient way rather than letting it escalate. These are some very simple practices that an organization can bring in and can just save it from so much distraction and inefficiency that can happen when relationships and conflicts take over. So those are the 7.
Right.
Autonomy, purpose, meetings, decision-making, transparency, self-directed learning, relationships and conflict. There's tons of practices in there, and the idea is you don't need to wait for permission from somebody to start. You can start for yourself like tomorrow. You can start in the small level, and then you can bring that up and it can transpose into full organizational culture. That's a horizontal culture. And then this can go, of course, into like the governance system. And then often when you have this kind of inclusive, participatory culture and way of functioning, oftentimes it can make its way into the way the profits are shared. So it definitely it will have an impact on the way salaries take place, because what you're looking at when you're working in inclusive and participatory ways is, any way you slice it, you're going to get to more fairness as being of value. And fairness is something that's felt. And so that means that if there's transparency, then people will be uncomfortable with having ways of working the finances where it doesn't feel fair. So it brings things back into a space of well-being for all.
Right. And what do you think is, because you have it in a specific order, what do you think is the most difficult part when you start implementing this?
Well, relationships and conflicts is the one where people are like, oh, terrified of, right? And then transparency around money is a tricky one, because, and the reason why is not because it's difficult in and of itself. It's, if I'm going to get back to that word, triggers, because we have a complicated relationship with money, each of us. Each of our life stories has its own complexity around money, and so each of us has trigger points. So we can be having a work-based conversation around money, and there can be triggers. And if you don't know how to deal with that, then you can actually you can create some problems for yourself. So I would, sometimes I say there's some easy places to start. I always go back to co-managed meetings, very low risk, right? AAA, Appreciative Culture, super low risk. These ones here are really easy stepping stones for starting. And then as you get, as you make your way through, you start thinking about things. Oh, how are we making our decisions? What are the different decision-making methodologies? And start unpacking, I'm going to call them bad habits, especially for small organizations, small businesses that take on, that the founder might think they're consulting people because when they bump into whoever, they ask for advice, right? That does not constitute an open and participatory decision-making culture, right? So how do you actually formalize decision-making practices and methodologies and processes within the organization? So yeah, do people know what decisions are made collectively, which ones where there is a consultative process, and which ones people make on their own, and which ones that might have a democratic voting process? Is that known by everyone? Is it understood together? Is there a shared vocabulary of it? Or is it just whoever's founded the company is just kind of like doing what is natural to them, because that's what founders do. We create a company that's the image of our own personal culture and comfort zone, and invite people into it. We don't never really say that. I myself am a founder and am very aware that's what I did. And when I sold the company to all the employees and we became a cooperative, and I mean, we were self-managing before that. You don't need to be a cooperative to be self-managing. Part of that journey was me in my own painful coming to terms with the fact that, oh yeah, the company does this because I like doing that. The company does this because I like doing that. But it's not necessarily the thing as we grow and expand that's in service of the company. So yeah, it's that's a journey for the founder.
Yeah, I also remember in some presentation you mentioned the, I'm not sure if it was the right word, but the frustration you had that people didn't come with initiatives.
Oh, that's such a, everybody will talk about that. Like, oh, it's open up and we're so ready for what everybody wants to do and say and have initiatives on. And founders are often frustrated that people aren't coming up with initiatives. Or in a team meeting, somebody who's chairing the team meeting is like, I understand. I say to everybody what's points on the agenda and people aren't coming up with it. That's because there isn't a light container, like some kind of framework that's holding it, that's explicit, and that provides the safety that shows that this is serious, this is real, this is a process, and this is how we function now, not the old way that we assume how an organization functions. I think if you're going to say we're going to be doing this differently, you can't just say we're doing it differently and not put in place something that has a little bit of formality to it. And it is a little trick because especially in a small organization, you're like, oh, we'll just do things informally until we hit a size where we need to do them formally. And we also think formally means like long and extensive and boring, but formally can be 3 lines. Like we have a decision log. It's basically a Google spreadsheet, and you can open it, and in a one quick view, you see decisions that go back years and years and years and years, right? It's so light, it's so easy, but there's a formality to it. Everybody knows that any governance decisions of the company go into the decision log, right? And so you have a one-stop view of all of that. So if you say that decisions are available to everybody and they're all embedded within some really long meeting notes that you don't know what document, that you have to open 20 to start like researching it out, right?
Right.
You're not really open and transparent. It's whoever was there the longest and remembers them is going to be more aware of the decisions than anybody new who comes in. So that's why I keep saying, like, when you formalize systems, you're really thinking about full inclusion of everybody today and the future ones coming in. So you're giving yourselves the systems for growth as well.
Right. I really understand this part. I like to see what your ideas on this one is. In one book, which is called, I don't think I can translate it that fast because it's a Dutch title. It's about lessons from the war for managers. Let's put it that way. And so it is about the German army, how they have a really different settings in the Second World War than the Allied army, right? So in the Allied army, it was, especially from America and the UK, it was the commander makes the decision and it goes downward the line. And by the time it comes to the front of the war, the changes already happened. So they have to go back and ask for new directions. In the German war, they say, we have not German war, in the German army, they say, we have a very clear goal and we don't give out the details. So we say, you have to conquer that bridge and that's it. So because they train the people very well, they know what, and it's called the doctrine. They know the rules and regulations. They know how to behave, but they can fill in the details depending on what's happening on the front line, depending on what's happening in reality. And the book is about how you can translate that into a corporation, into a business. And I thought that was a really interesting idea because especially on the topic decision-making, that is really an important topic for me. I write about that a lot. And I think it is, if you have what you just said, if you have these light decisions written down, right, the rules, the regulations, and you have a decision log, it's very easy for people to make up their own decisions later on, right? If they know what is a standard in this company, they can make their own, maybe not company-wise, but smaller decisions. They can work on their own and feed off this document that they have. I like that. I like that a lot. Can you maybe explain, because I liked it, how this decision-making, this conscious consent way of decision-making is going, this process that you describe in the book?
Yeah, so in the book, I give real space to explaining consent-based decision-making. And I just want to qualify that. I don't do that because I think it's the best decision-making method. I think all decision-making methods have their relevance in different contexts. It's just that for whatever reason, us human beings have very little experience on the consent-based decision-making. It's like it's the most neglected of the decision-making methodologies. And it has real value because consent-based decision-making, what's interesting about it is it's very inclusive. So everybody gets a voice and its focus is movement. So staying in movement is something that companies need to do. It's like the consensus one, which can be very long and everybody has to be on board, right, is really relevant, especially for, I don't know, like co-living context, right? But in an organization, things are moving fast. And there's so many contexts where people want to be making decisions together, but they don't do it because they think it can't be done efficiently. So consent-based decision-making can break through that. So I propose the one called generative decision-making, which is built on integrative decision-making. And what it's really doing is it's helping people break down a few things. So first of all, a lot of confusion happens in decision making because people are starting to comment and react on things that haven't even been clarified. So everybody's understanding the proposal differently, and everybody's already like expending energies on react. So we put a boundary on that and say no reactions until we've clarified that the proposal was properly understood. I mean, it sounds so simple, right?
It does.
Is that like, well, of course. Well,
Yeah.
of course. Why would we all be like reacting on something we don't all understand? So that means there's a facilitator holding that boundary and saying, okay, any clarifying questions? Who answers the clarifying questions? Just the proposer. Like everybody doesn't need to add their 2 cents. It's not time for a debate. It's just, here's a proposal. Can we clarify what it is? And then you don't have to clarify everything. Every single day, we all make proposals that have a level of information that just goes into the field of trust. Like we clarify one thing in the center and the rest, that's what a proposal is. We're never detailing everything, right? So really like learning that. So, focusing to the proposer and the proposer clarifies, and the proposer just says either, yeah, I can clarify it, here's the clarification, or no, I can't. And so being explicit, what's clear, what's left unsaid around this proposal. Again, no big debate, no conversation, right? Can you imagine if you had like a clarifying session around a proposal? It can take like 10 seconds to 10 minutes, never anymore. And never, it's like so rare, it would take more than that. And then you're like, okay, everybody, speak your mind. How's this making you feel? And everybody knows that they're going to get heard. And this is efficient because it's a go around and everybody will be heard. And if you're not ready, well, we'll come back to you. But when I speak to the center. I'm not speaking to so-and-so and entering the debate around them. I heard what so-and-so said. I think the absolute opposite, and I'm going to say it. And it'll just hover in the center. So what it's doing is it's saying every perspective matters. And we want to hear your perspective. Everybody wants to hear everybody's perspective, because when all the perspectives are spoken, the full complexity of the decision is revealed. And so what you're doing is you're shifting from, I want the decision to be my personal thing, the way I want the world to function, to all of a sudden you're going, all right, there's 10 other ways this could be approached. And when I listen to them, I'm like, huh, that was not so bad. Huh, never thought of that one. So all of a sudden I'm not so attached to the way I wanted it to be, just hearing. So each person feels heard, and each person starts to like detach from it having to be my way. You see that there's multiple pathways forward. And then actually having a process to say, you know, before we take this decision on, does anybody see a risk it could cause to the company, right? And so you're no longer going, oh, it's not my preferred proposal versus your preferred proposal. You're all taking care of the company together. So you're really shifting your posture from just defending your position to now like, oh, I'm with my colleagues caring for the business. So many things go on in that generative decision-making process that really builds a collective culture. And so the fact that it's underutilized everywhere I go, I really do make a point of inviting people just to live the experience of it and to think about where are the spaces in your organization where it might be useful for you.
Yeah. I can see so many advantages and so much saved discussion, saved discussion, right? So
yeah,
I've been in so many meetings where everybody have to give their 2 cents, and and then in the end nothing has been decided, right? So that's also also always very funny. You then you go leave the meeting, go like, so what was the decision? What are we going to do now?
So much frustration and inefficiency. This is what it is it's a light protocol. So like a protocol for me, when I think of a protocol, I think of like think of a river and the banks of a river. What do they do? They help the water flow. If you don't have banks of a river, you just got the water kind of all over. Well, that's what you're talking to me about when you're talking about, like, we talked this, we don't really know what happened. It's just kind of, and this protocol just holds it so that you can actually be in movement and flow in it. And in this protocol of generative decision making, it's, you know, the safe enough for now and good enough to try. Is that's all we need.
Okay, you need to repeat that. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's safe enough for now and good enough to try.
Yeah.
It's like, we know it's not going to create, you know, some serious damage. So why do we need to continue talking about it for an hour? Let's just stop and go into the do. You know what when you said before, it's like when we talk about things and we get overwhelmed. So it's like, I really think one of the things that we've got to reconnect with, because it's part of our human nature, is we've gotten so cognitive off balance. We really like to be in the talking cognitive space, right? So to rebalance of like, we've talked about this enough, let's just try it out. And then we'll come back and talk some more. But to keep talking without actually having experimented something or done it is not necessarily helping us, and actually create that, you know, that moment where you start losing energy and you're exhausted and you're down. Whereas when you can cut through it and go into the doing space, everybody is like, oh yeah, let's just see what happens. It might have a little bit of like anxiety because we don't know what it's going to be like and to try. It's funny, at in our organization the other day, we were having one of those, we were shifting the meeting structures of the way we've been meeting because we've grown and different things have happened. You know, companies are always moving, right? And we were having a conversation about how it might change. And at one point it just became a proposal of, okay, for the next 3 months, every other Monday, this will meet this way, and every other Monday we'll meet that way, and we'll try it out for 3 months and talk. And everybody was like, fine, no objections. It was just like, we don't know what it's going to be, and we can't even imagine it until we've lived it. So let's just do it for 3 months. And that's what we've been doing.
I think I've kind of missed that in the book. What you're just saying now is experimenting.
Yeah.
And I mentioned the book before by James Altucher. He talks about it too. He talks about doing small experiments, right? So instead of thinking about everything through, just do a small experiment, right? Make it as tiny as possible so it doesn't hurt you, it doesn't kill you, it doesn't cost you a lot of money if it goes wrong. Just do a small experiment, and you know if it's working or not. And if it doesn't work, there's 2 things can happen, right? If it doesn't work, you've learned something. If it does work, you have success, right? You can move on. So if it doesn't work, you stop, but you've learned something. It's not a loss. It's not a mistake. You've learned something. And if it works, you've success, continue.
So they all go together. This like learning mindset, experimenting mindset, and practice mindset. They're part of like, they're just part of the same thing. And why don't we go there all the time? Let's go back to the science around learning. See, my education background is very useful, right? When we're in a place of learning, it's calling in our vulnerable self. There's a humility to learning. There's a vulnerability to learning.
Right, because you don't know.
Yeah. So if our work world is about being a professional, like if the mental model we have is showing up with the answers and the knowing how everything happens, you're going to struggle to enter that learning, experimenting, practicing space, right? So when we're actually doing here is what we've got to unravel of, you know, what is our definition of a fabulous professional, a fabulous leader, a great expert? Like, does an expert mean you're not learning anymore? See, for me, a good expert is someone who's in forever learning. It's your questions are getting sharper and sharper and sharper and sharper, right? And you stay in that learning space. But we've come to think of like experts like that, the same way we think of leaders as people we follow versus leaders who are giving space for everybody to be in their personal leadership, as well as claiming their own leadership and gift, for, like doing the yes and the both, right?
Right.
So some of these mental models that are in us, we're all carrying them, need to be a little bit shaken up, right? And so for me, you can shake them up by talking about them or reading a book, but you can also shake them up by initiating a practice. So if you go and run like if you go and invite the AAA appreciative process to 3 of your colleagues in the next week, right? And then you go back and you go, what am I learning about continuous improvement, my own learning culture, how we do feedback within our organization? Like, after you've done it 3 times, then you'll have a real like learning insights that you could never ever have had by just talking about it.
Right. I have one part about the book talks about great questions and better listening.
Yes.
And you also written a couple of times on your blog about it. For me, of course, as a business coach, asking great questions is really important. And I have also, like you said, I have the intention of always learning. So I want to become a better question asker and also a better listener. What is an important step to take if you want to ask better questions?
So if we go exactly to what we've been talking about so far, about the learning, practice, experiment space, so like go into the do. So formulate a question on whatever it is and go and talk to somebody and have them like help you improve it. So we have a game that we play, like, so imagine you have a question right now, like, is there something, I don't know, what's a question you're living in right now or that you want to address? If you ask that question, all I'll do is I'll ask you back a question and I'll ask you questions around your question. And you know, you're a coach, 5 questions around a question, you know, that question is going to be, completely iterated and fine-tuned by questions.
Yeah.
Right?
So simple.
So simple. Like what we do is we get the first version of a question and off we go.
Yeah.
Right? We don't iterate our questions. For some reason, I don't even know how we got to that. We just have got to this practice. We're already excited enough to get our question and happy and delighted with ourselves. Off we go. We don't iterate them. And it might come back to that whole thing about the vulnerability around, there's a vulnerability about being in a question, right? So we're feeling a little bit like that, right? So it's like we want to go straight way to going into the answer space. But like having a question and then being in the question around your question, that's like an extra layer of vulnerability again. And yet, so good.
Woo, woo. Okay. I want to also not be appreciative of your time. I have 2 more questions.
Yep.
In the TED Talk a while ago, 2018, you talked about the way that you had this negotiation of how much you earn project-based.
Yeah. Compensation is conversation, is the practice that we call it.
Does that mean that everybody in your company works project-based and earns project-based?
So is that your question?
Yes. I didn't know, but it is now.
Or is your question around like how does conversation work for compensation? Is it more about like the functioning of a project-based company, or is it a functioning of compensation with conversation?
I think it is. I think it is more about how you get into a fair discussion with somebody about how much either both of you should make in a project. When, for example, you just worked with the two of you, and not you can make it difficult, make like 5 people, but let's just take 2.
Yes. Love it. So how do you get into a fair discussion? Oh, yeah. That's just brilliant. So, I mean, I function for the last 5 years with the practice of compensation as conversation. So it doesn't matter what level if it's at a budget, it's the cost of a product, a training, it's the annual salary, it's the same practice, right? So when we get into a conversation about this, a couple of things that we do that have made it very easy and fluid for us is we don't talk about money to start off, right? We go, how was the project? How did this project feel for you? And we have a little check-in. So I go, oh, I love this project. There was that crunchy part, but like we made it through. And then the other one, relational, has nothing to do with money. After that, we'll be like, okay, let's look at like what this project involved and what each of us did. So we'll take like a couple of the key parts of the project, and we have a shared vocabulary. So what I did could be doing, executing. It could be, we call it holding, which is, you know, the stuff that you have on your shoulders, like you're stewarding, you're working with the subtle stuff, right? People don't always see it. So doing, holding, learning, which means I can be doing and learning. And if I'm saying I'm doing learning, then I'm conscious that somebody else is supporting me, right? And coaching. So coaching is somebody who is not necessarily in the project, but that people come to with specific questions. So you're not holding as a coach, right? So we have that shared vocabulary. So everybody just takes a minute of silence, and on a Google sheet, we'll all go, I'll go, that was my doing, holding, coaching, learning, 0, coaching, holding, And we all just kind of do it, each of us. And it's a way for each of us to remember our role in the project, right? And then we'll just say, is there anything that needs to be spoken? Is there anything that needs to be spoken? And I'll be like, somebody will say, Samantha, I can't believe you did coaching there. You weren't there. You were on holidays and during that week. Like you weren't even around. I'm like, oh yeah, sorry, that was the other project. See what I mean? So we have a moment to be in our self memory of what we did with a shared vocabulary, and a moment for anything to be spoken that anybody notices, right? So it's the time to do it. We still haven't spoken about money, right? And then we'll move on to the next part, which is, okay, what if we looked at the budget of this project now that we know what people did, right? We understand it, and we distribute it as 100%. So budgets are finite, right? So 100%. So when I distribute it, imagine it's just the 2 of us, right? Well, I don't just put a number for me, I put a number for you, which is easy when you're doing it for 2. But imagine there's 6 of us. I have to put 6 numbers, and I have to verify that my 6 numbers add up to 100%. So we take 2 or 3, sometimes 5 minutes for each person to do all their numbers for everyone, right? And it's hard because once you're not just doing it for yourself, and you're like, ooh, what is a fair way of sharing up the pie? Completely change the game. Then I'm just in there kind of negotiating for my biggest part of it. Because now I see if I take that chunk, oh, so-and-so who did all that doesn't get it. And so-and-so who did all that doesn't, oh my gosh, right? So you're in that space. So we all share what our numbers were. And we all share like anything that helped us in our logic of determining our numbers like that. We have a go around and everybody shares. And then we say, okay, are we comfortable to take the average of these, or does anybody want us to do a second round for any reason? And somebody could say, well, yeah, you could see some of the things were like different perspectives that are radically different were happening here. And now that we've heard all that information, could we just do a second go of it? At which point we do our numbers again. We share and we go, is everybody okay taking the average of these numbers? And everybody goes, oh yeah, that's good. Because you've dealt with all the friction points. There's still no numbers. There's still no actual like financial numbers.
It's just percentages.
Now we've got the percentages, and then we just take that budget and we just throw it down into from the percentage, and everybody has a number. And of course, at the end, how could you not feel okay with your number? You've checked into the project, you've had opportunities to question things, you've gone to that second round, you've seen the different perspectives, you've had your own experience of understanding that, oh, I wish everybody could get paid twice or 3 times as much, and this is the realities of the numbers, or oh my God, look at this. And what we experience in this is there's even moments of kindness. What people will say is they say like, I can't believe you put that number for yourself. You did way more work than that. You've got to learn how to value what you're doing more. I won't accept it. And so sometimes we'll have that, and we'll do a second round so somebody can help learn how to value themselves. So there'll actually be the collective caring of that. And our checkout question is pretty much the same every time. Given that all that happened in this project and how things were paid, would I be happy to work with this exact same team again?
Oh, that's a powerful one.
And so basically we're inviting each person to anything that's still there and hanging. It's your moment to let it go.
Right.
And the question is, if you're not ready to say yes, what do you need to be able to say yes?
Wow, that's learning.
So you can feel the deep level of self-responsibility, collective responsibility, fairness, care. For me, this is the, from a yoga perspective, the Shavasana move. It's the move that integrates everything of horizontal practices.
Right.
Proper sharing money together is so powerful, and it really creates a collective field like no other process that I know.
Okay, I'm forgetting my last question. I'm just having to follow on this one, right? So, sorry.
Yeah.
This is just so interesting.
I know this is interesting stuff. Compensation is conversation.
So you write down the percentages, and then you divide the budget of the project at the end of the project, right? But at the beginning, you have to determine what the budget is. How much you're going to sell the project for to a client.
Yeah.
Do you do that together, or is somebody, how does that work?
Well, it's contextual. And I mean, not every organization functions in projects. So it would function like this. Some people would have their negotiations at like the salary level, right? So and the way we work at Percolab is, it's contextually adjusted to us. So us, it is, whatever the system you have for doing your compensation as conversation, just make sure that it's agreed at the beginning of the project. So you agree it. So you could agree at the beginning of the project, we're not going to do it now, we'll do it at the end. For the budget coming in, when you have your team, right, we're going to be like, we're building the team, and we'll be like, this is the budget that we have for the project. You still have a project lead, right? But the project lead does not have authority over the members of the team, right? The project lead is doing the admin and the project management stuff, and is like doing all the budget works and sheets and bringing it to the team and preparing those conversations, but doesn't have the decision-making authority. So when you say who determines the budget at the beginning, it's contextual, right? So sometimes a client comes and the contract that you have is like, oh, we have $100,000 to do this work. Okay. So then you have a team meeting, and that's the first thing will be is, here's the budget, here's the work. So when we start talking about the work to be done, the money is on the table, like from the get-go. It's never, I mean, but we practice radical transparency at Percolab. And as I say, you don't want to start here, right? Start with team meetings. Start with team meetings, start with appreciative culture. These are easier spaces.
I know, but this is just so interesting. And the last question is, when you have that budget, is there a percentage going to the company, to the organization?
So again, if you want to come back to the way we organize at Percolab, I can give you our specific way, which, doesn't mean that everybody needs to.
I understand.
We collectively agree on amount that goes to the central pot, as we call it, right? Which is used for all of our collective things. also used for our personal expenses.
Right.
So, and our practice is each person can take 7% of their salary from the collective pot to do whatever they need to do to be a kick-ass professional, and you don't have to ask permission from anyone, but you do need to inform people, right? So that's the collective pot. The rest is being used for three things: for commission for getting the project, getting that budget, project management of that budget, and then the work on the project, right? So this is for a project-based company. And so we agree on a minimum max that's allowed for commission and a minimum and max range that's allowed for project management. And so when that financial conversation starts, it always starts off with, do we agree on the percentage for the commission for this project? Like how much of the project budget is for commission and how much of it is for project management within the range that we've all agreed as being an acceptable range for the company. And then if it's multiple people who worked on getting the project, well, they will have their own compensation and conversation to divvy up that commission budget.
I understand.
Same thing for project management. If it's multiple people involved,
Yeah.
and they do that. Yep. So
Yeah.
does that clarify it all?
Yes, it does. Oh, Samantha, this was just so wonderful. I learned so much. It was so amazing. There's so much more I can learn and use from the book. Just to give it back to you. One thing that the first part that you mentioned was purpose, right? Is so you make sure you make clear what the purpose is. You ask what the purpose, what everybody thinks the purpose is, and I've started using that question, right? What is your purpose of doing this, or what is your purpose of doing that? To learn, to understand what the other party is seeing as the purpose for what we're doing, and not just assuming what their purpose. So that was the first thing I took away from the book that I started using right away, experimenting with it. So I love that. I don't do meetings. So for me, that's only a small part that I can use, but this was right away that I could use. That was great. I just want to give you that back.
Fabulous.
Okay, so when people want to know more about you, about what you do, how you work, where they need to go?
So Percolab.com is an international network of Percolab cooperatives that exist both in Europe and in North America. I am based in Montreal, so you can contact Percolab. If you want to know more about going horizontal, every month we have an open and free event where you can play, because we've developed a card game on going horizontal. And so you can join in for a short and fun session online with people from whoever show up from around the world that month. And they take place in different languages even. So the game even exists in Dutch.
Oh, wow.
So you know, because we have a Percolab in Belgium. And,
right.
And so you just look at the calendar and you'll see if there's different events taking place in Dutch. And so you can join to play the game. We offer online practicum courses. So just, you know, easy 3 times 2.5 hour simple courses if you want to get initiated into the practices. And then we offer more extensive like learning labs that are 8 weeks long. But I mean, you can speak to somebody in the Going Horizontal community. There's the Going Horizontal website as well. It's all out there, and it's really just like join the movement and start initiating practices and then start talking about them. We also have the medium space for Percolab, where some of the practices and stories that are happening in an emergent way are shared on that space as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Samantha.
Thank you so much for having me today and for all the great work that you do.